I heard the crunch of snow outside my door, and then realized whatever it wasn't human, and it was trying to get in. The wind rattled the edges of the cabin, dragging icy fingers across the windows. Snow fell thickly, muffling the world outside until it was nothing but white and shadow. Inside, the heater hummed, but the warmth didn't reach my chest. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint whistle through the cracks in the walls, sounded louder, sharper. I told myself I was imagining it, but the feeling in my gut said otherwise. Something was waiting out there, patient, watching, and it knew exactly where I was. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the noise. It was the way the cold inside the house felt intentional, as if it had followed me in and settled with a purpose. I noticed it late one evening, standing near the living room window, watching snow fall in thick, drifting sheets. The house was old but sturdy, a single-story place at the edge of a frozen lake, surrounded by trees bent low under the weight of winter. I'd moved there after my father died, needing distance from people who kept asking how I was doing in voices that expected a simple answer. At night, the road leading out was buried and impassable. I was alone by design. The furnace hummed steadily, yet the air near the walls felt sharper, colder. I rubbed my hands together, breathing slowly, listening to the wind rake across the siding. The sound was constant, almost soothing, until it wasn't. Somewhere outside, beneath the wind, something moved. At first it was subtle, a crunch of snow that didn't match the rhythm of drifting branches. I paused, holding my breath, listening hard. The sound stopped. I told myself it was an animal passing through, drawn by warmth or shelter. But then it came again. Slow, deliberate, footsteps. They circled the house at a distance, never rushing, never hesitating. I moved from window to window, peering out through frost-smeared glass. My headlights, left on earlier to light the driveway, cut weak cones through the snow, illuminating nothing but white and shadow. The steps stopped directly outside the bedroom wall. My heart began to pound, heavy and loud, each beat tightening my chest. I stood still, muscles tense, waiting for another sound. Seconds dragged into minutes. The silence pressed in, thick and unbearable. Then something scraped along the siding. Not claws, too smooth for that. More like fingers testing the surface. A soft, dragging sound traveled slowly toward the window. I backed away, my breath shallow, every instinct screaming to hide. A shape moved past the glass. Tall. Too tall. It didn't rush by like an animal would. It passed slowly, its outline warped by snow and darkness. I caught glimpses. Long limbs bending at wrong angles. A head that dipped unnaturally low as if it were studying the house itself. The power flickered. The lights dimmed, then steadied, leaving the room cast in a weak yellow glow. Outside, the wind rose, howling louder, almost covering the sound of something shifting its weight on the porch. That was when the knocking started. Not at the door, on the wall. 3 slow knocks, spaced evenly apart. The sound traveled through the studs, deep and hollow. I pressed my back against the opposite wall, my hands trembling, my mouth dry. My thoughts raced. No cell signal, no neighbors, snow piling higher by the minute. The knocks came again, closer to the door this time. I grabbed the fireplace poker, my grip slick with sweat despite the cold. The house felt impossibly small now, every shadow stretched thin and sharp. I could hear my own breathing, fast and uneven, like it might give me away. The door handle moved, just a fraction. I froze, every muscle locked. The handle stilled, then turned slowly, deliberately, testing resistance. When it didn't open, something heavy leaned against the door. The wood groaned, flexing inward. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the rug, barely keeping my balance. The door shuddered again, harder this time. Snow sifted down from the frame. I screamed, not words, just sound, and struck the door with the poker, a useless, desperate gesture. The impact echoed loudly. Outside, whatever was there paused. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard breathing, deep, measured, too controlled to be animal, too wrong to be human. It exhaled slowly, fogging the glass of the small window near the door. I saw its face only briefly, a suggestion of features, eyes set too far apart, skin stretched tight and pale like it had never known warmth. It pushed again. The frame cracked. Wood splintered. I felt the vibration through the floor, through my bones. Panic surged, hot and overwhelming. I ran for the bedroom, slammed the door, shoved the dresser against it, my movements frantic and clumsy. The house shook as the front door gave way. Footsteps inside now, heavy, careful, exploring. It moved through the house with unsettling patience, pausing often, as if listening for me. Each step brought it closer. My chest burned, my vision blurred at the edges. The bedroom door bowed inward. I pressed myself into the corner, clutching the poker, my entire body shaking. The door split with a sharp crack. A long limb forced its way through the gap, fingers flexing, searching. I swung wildly, striking it hard. A sound came from the other side. Not a roar, not a scream, something almost thoughtful. The limb withdrew. The pressure eased. After a moment, the footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate, moving back through the house. The wind swallowed the sound as it left. I stayed there until morning, unmoving, my muscles locked in place. When daylight finally crept through the window, the house was wrecked. The front door hung broken. Snow drifted across the floor. Outside, there were no clear tracks, just deep impressions in the snow that stopped abruptly a few yards from the house, as if whatever had come to my door had decided, at the last possible moment, to let me live. I never spent another winter there. But sometimes, when the cold settles deep and the wind presses against my current home, I still listen for footsteps that move with purpose, slow, patient, and waiting for a door to give way. The snowman appeared harmless for the first 2 days, and that's what still bothers me. The way evil can arrive already wearing something familiar. It started after the first real snowfall of the season, the kind that falls steadily for hours and turns the world quiet and white. I remember watching it from the living room window, the flakes drifting down under the yellow glow of the street lamp. Our house reflected faintly in the glass. The heater hummed, the clock ticked, and for the first time since we moved in, the place felt like it might actually become a home. We'd only been there a month. A new town, a new start after things fell apart elsewhere. I kept telling myself the isolation would be good for the kids. Less noise, fewer reminders of what we'd lost. Winter forced us inward into routines, breakfast together, homework at the table, evenings spent listening to the wind push against the house. The kids built the snowman that afternoon while I shoveled the driveway. I watched them through the window as I worked, my breath coming out in steady clouds, my muscles burning from the cold. They laughed, arguing over where to place the arms, packing snow carefully like it mattered that he be done right. When they finished, the snowman stood just beyond the yard fence, tall and uneven, made of 3 heavy balls stacked with effort. Coal eyes, a crooked smile, a scarf from the old box in the garage. I remember thinking it looked a little too tall. That night, after the kids were asleep, I noticed it again while locking the door. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard, and the snowman's outline stretched toward the house. The wind had picked up, hissing softly across the snow. For just a moment, I thought the shadow moved on its own. I told myself I was tired. The next morning, the kids said the snowman had talked to them. They said it casually, over cereal, like it wasn't worth making a big deal out of. My spoon paused halfway to my mouth. I felt that subtle tightening in my chest, the early warning sign of fear I'd learned not to ignore. "What do you mean, talked?" I asked, keeping my voice light. They shrugged, said it was just whispers when they were outside, that it sounded like the wind, but clearer, that it knew their names. I laughed then, a little too loudly, explained how wind can do strange things in winter, how snow and fences and houses make sounds that feel personal if you listen too closely. They accepted that explanation easily. Kids want the world to make sense. I was the one who kept watching the yard. Over the next few days, the snowman changed. Not dramatically, just enough to make me doubt myself. Its arms angled slightly differently. The smile looked wider in certain light. Once, I was sure its head had tilted, just a fraction, as if it were listening to the house. The kids grew quieter. They stopped wanting to play outside. At night, I heard them whispering to each other after bedtime, their voices tense and urgent. When I asked what was wrong, they said the snowman didn't like it when they ignored him, that he said bad things would happen if they didn't listen. I felt cold then, deeper than the winter air could explain. That evening, as the sky darkened early and the temperature dropped, I stood at the window and stared out at the yard. Snow fell lightly, steady and silent. The snowman stood motionless, perfectly still. Then I heard it, a sound like breath moving through packed snow, not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. I stepped back from the window, my heart beginning to race. The house felt different suddenly, too quiet, too still. Even the heater seemed to struggle, the air growing colder room by room. That night, one of the kids screamed. I ran down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor, my pulse roaring in my ears. I found them sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, pointing toward the window. They said the snowman had been right outside, that it had leaned close to the glass and whispered that it was time to come outside, that it was cold alone. I didn't sleep after that. Before dawn, I put on my coat and boots and went outside with a shovel. The snow creaked under my weight, sharp and loud. The yard was pale and empty, the sky heavy with clouds. The snowman loomed ahead of me, taller than I remembered, its coal eyes dark and watchful. Up close, it felt wrong. The snow was packed too tightly, harder than it should have been. The scarf was frozen stiff, like it had been soaked and left to set. As I raised the shovel, a whisper brushed past my ear, so soft I almost missed it. They belonged to the cold. My hands shook. I brought the shovel down hard, smashing into the snowman's torso. Snow exploded outward, chunks scattering across the ground. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet morning. I struck again and again, until it collapsed into a shapeless heap. The air felt warmer immediately. That night, the kids slept through without a sound. In the morning, fresh snow had fallen. In the yard, just beyond the fence, a new shape stood half-formed, 3 rounded mounds already stacked, waiting. We moved out before the next snowfall. Even now, years later, when winter settles deep and the nights stretch long, I catch myself listening for whispers in the wind. Soft, patient voices that know my children's names and are waiting for someone else to build them a body again. The first night in the house, I noticed that my reflection lingered a fraction of a second longer than it should have, as if the glass needed time to decide whether I was really there. I had arrived just before dusk, driving the last miles on a narrow road swallowed by snowbanks. The headlights carved pale tunnels through falling snow, each flake flashing bright and then vanishing. The engine's low hum was steady, comforting, and I kept it running longer than necessary when I pulled into the driveway. Turning it off felt like sealing myself inside something that had already been waiting. The house stood alone, a dark shape against the white field. No neighboring lights, no sound but the ticking engine and the distant wind sliding over the roof like fingers. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, breathing slowly, watching my breath fog the windshield. I told myself this was what I wanted: quiet, a reset, a winter to myself after the separation and the noise of my old life. Inside, the air smelled old and cold, like dust and frozen wood. I unpacked slowly, establishing a routine right away. Coat on the hook, boots by the door, kettle on the stove. Outside, night settled in, the sky heavy and low, clouds glowing faintly with reflected snowlight. Time felt thicker here, as if minutes didn't move unless I pushed them. The first irregularity was the sound of footsteps upstairs. They were faint, careful, as though someone was testing the floorboards. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, heart tapping faster than my thoughts, listening. The house had been empty before I moved in. I knew that. The steps stopped when I held my breath. After a while, I convinced myself it was the house adjusting to heat. Old beams shifting in the cold. That explanation worked for exactly one night. By the second evening, I started noticing her in reflective surfaces. Not clearly, never clearly. A pale shape behind me in the darkened window, gone when I turned. A suggestion of movement in the hallway mirror that didn't match my own. Each time, my skin tightened, a prickling along my arms and neck, like static before a storm. I tried to ignore it. Winter makes you imagine things. Silence presses in. I filled the space with small sounds, the radio murmuring softly, dishes clinking, the steady rhythm of my own movements. I watched snow drift past the windows for hours, the flakes catching the porch light, falling endlessly, patiently. On the third night, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then steadied, leaving the house quieter than before. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum, to my own breathing. That was when I felt it, the unmistakable sense of being watched, not from a corner or a doorway, but from very close behind. I didn't turn around right away. My shoulders were tight, my jaw clenched. My heart beat slow and heavy, each pulse loud in my ears. When I finally faced the hallway mirror, she was there. She stood just behind my left shoulder, her outline softened as if seen through frost. She wore something long and dark, old-fashioned in a way I couldn't quite place. Her face was pale, features blurred, but I felt her attention settle on me with a weight that made my knees weak. I whispered without meaning to. Just a sound, really. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged the glass. Frost bloomed across the mirror in thin, branching lines, creeping outward from where she stood. I backed away, my heel catching on the rug, nearly falling. When I looked again, the mirror showed only me, wide-eyed, shaking, alone. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every night, the house grew more active. Soft footsteps paced the upstairs hallway. Doors I'd closed were open in the morning. The air carried a faint scent, cold and floral, like flowers left too long in snow. I began to dread reflective surfaces, covering mirrors with sheets, avoiding windows after dark. But she found ways around that. I saw her in the glass of picture frames, in the dark screen of my phone, in the glossy black of the television when it was turned off, always close, always patient, never touching. My fear shifted into something else, an aching sadness that wasn't entirely my own. One evening, during a heavy snowfall, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, listening to the wind batter the walls. Time stretched. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I felt her presence settle beside me, cold radiating through the air. Images pressed into my thoughts, waiting, watching winters pass, the house filling with warmth and emptying again. People arriving hopeful, leaving changed. She wasn't angry. She was anchored, bound to the quiet, to the cold, to the spaces between lives. "I won't stay," I said softly, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry." The lights flickered once. The pressure eased. When I looked up, the room was empty. I left the next morning, driving slowly through falling snow, the road stretching ahead in pale uncertainty. In the rearview mirror, the house shrank into the white, indistinct and still. Sometimes, on winter nights, when I catch my reflection in a dark window, it takes a moment too long to move. And I wonder if she's still there, waiting for someone who won't leave. Dare to hear more? Hit subscribe if you want to keep the lights on.